Good afternoon, everybody. Dave Putz here from JKP Holdings. Alongside me, Nathan Turner on a Friday afternoon.
Indeed. Hello.
Hello, man. Hopefully your week's been well. We all missed you last week.
Good.
So you were doing some very crafting projects, I heard, with some friends. How'd it go? How'd your little trip away go?
It was really good, really good. We get it's my high school buddies, and so we get together once a year, go off for a few days, and just no wives, no kids, nothing, and just we go and have fun and mock each other and eat good food, and it's good times.
You guys, man, that's cool. So it's interesting because you said you were in the Rockies.
Yeah, I grew up in Alberta, so most everybody's still there. So I went out there, and then we took off to Fernie, BC. It's a ski town where we used to go all the time, and rented a cabin out there and had a great time. It was a lot of fun.
So when you're away like that, the house stays in solid order, right?
Yeah. That's one of the beauties of the business is, you can make it almost autopilot. I don't think there's any point where you can just completely walk away and just let it go. But it's fairly easy to rearrange what you're doing and your schedule and things like that. And it's not too big of a deal to walk away for a couple of days and then come back and pick up where you left off. So it was great fun. It was just a nice break.
Yep.
And get back to it.
And everyone talks about the fact you can do this business from almost anywhere. And yeah. I know I've been on vacation, and as much you want to put down the phone, the computer, you just grab it. If you're up early or up late, and just check my email. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. On this one, I didn't even take a computer. I just
freehanded. Wow.
I'm off. I'm out.
Nice.
So I know we put a few more assets offers in this week. A couple of bids we had last week didn't go through, which is fine.
Yeah.
What's been up with you? Have you had any issues or problems lately, or what's going on?
We're finally starting to see some of the stuff that was stuck in moratoriums is starting to move. A few of them are still stuck in that moratorium stage, which is frustrating, but it's not the end of the world. We had one actually I just heard yesterday, one that I purchased just less than 2 months ago, probably a month and a half ago, and it was already in foreclosure. Yep. This is in Oklahoma, Edmond, Oklahoma, just north of Tulsa, I think it is. Oklahoma City or Tulsa, I'm not sure which one, but anyway. Picked it up. It was already in foreclosure. Foreclosure just happened yesterday, and sure enough, it sold at auction. So I held that one for less than 2 months.
Wow.
We got to wait for the confirmation of sale in a few weeks, but otherwise it's in and down.
We have a few that are still pending eviction stuff, and just nuisance, but nothing you can do about it, right? And that's part of the game right now.
It's part of the game. It can be frustrating, and you can rant and rave, but you know what? Deal with it.
And you can be stuck in a situation where you go to foreclose and then BK happens. Non-COVID situations can cause all these problems. It's so interesting here, and then we want to get out of situations, right? You sell your whole loan. We've sold loans. But there are avenues that people that can get into stuff like this, that if you have a loan and you need to get rid of it, there are other options besides sell the whole loan, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And there's other pitfalls that as a group, we all kind of get together, we share our stories, not to brag or do it, but to learn from each other. We always get together to kind of see what someone else experiences, because we can't experience every scenario in every situation.
Yeah.
They can be similar, but a lot of times it's a venting thing, so.
Yeah, it's a lot of sharing ideas, sometimes a little bit of bragging, but mostly it's just sharing ideas and what's worked and how do you do this, or what do you do when you encounter that? And
yeah,
it's what a great community, and how we often we'll get together and share ideas and things.
So we want to bring our special guest Justin on. Justin has been in the note space as well for a long time. He runs his own webinars and stuff like that. We wanted to talk to him about some of the pitfalls he's experienced, and also talk about partials and hypos. I think that those are not spoken about a lot. In the pitfalls, I don't think you can speak enough about them, because it was what you're saying, every situation has a different pitfall, and learning from every different situation you possibly can help you prevent from making that same mistake. But if you don't know the mistake, you don't know not to make it. So
that's it. You get experience, and the more deals you do, the more you go, oh, okay, so I do want to do that. I don't want to do that. And
and you could be years later and you learn from like I learned about the forced place insurance. You're in the space for a long time, and all of a sudden you realize there's two different policies. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
So, well, Justin, welcome on. Can you share a little about how you got into notes? What were you doing before notes, and where you are now?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. I appreciate it. And hopefully someday we'll get to have the physical presence of each other, and maybe do some sort of collaboration like this.
Yeah.
But I've been in the note space for probably about five or 6 years now. Before that, I thought I was some young guy that could go out there and watch HGTV and learn how to flip a house and make a bunch of money, right? It looks really easy on TV, right?
Yeah.
So I quickly learned that it wasn't that easy. And someone had come along to teach about note investing. And I'm like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. I'll try this out. And they were talking about it, and they really intrigued me. And I learned all the trials and tribulations I had with trying to run a fix and flip or wholesale business. It just wasn't suited for me. I wasn't built for it. I was running out of contractors left and right. I wasn't really managing the cash flow very well. And so at the end of a project, I realized I wasn't really making that much money, over the span of a couple of months on, for example, a fix and flip with gains and paying contractors and, paying debt service and taxes and utilities and all the things that you have to pay for. It became a headache. So the note business was much simpler. I mean, much simpler, as you guys know. And so I was turned on from there, and I switched my whole portfolio over to traditional real estate, as I call it, to this financial real estate.
Yeah.
And so I bought a couple of non-performing loans, bought some performing loans with my own money in retirement. And I was like, hey, this is pretty cool. I like this. And so I talked to my investors that I was using in my traditional real estate world and, showed them what I was doing, and they liked the idea. Then I started advertising about this and was talking to local people and networking and showing people like, hey, this is what I do. I bought this note. I'm the bank. I'm sitting back here. I have nothing to do with it. And my bank account's just growing every month. And they're like, oh, wow, that's great. And so then I just slowly started, courting investors to selling them loans or partnering with me on deals. Mm-hmm. So, in the note space, you can run out of money real quick. Start raising capital and working with people and finding out how to partner with people, and then networking with guys like you and learning out where the inventory is and how to get the inventory and what to buy. And then I loved how you guys brought this in about the pitfalls in the business, about how you really learn about your hardships that you go through in real estate and even the note space. I mean, I've lost a good chunk of money before, and in one of my first deals, because I made, an error that I shouldn't have made and in due diligence. And it cost me a lot of money. And I'll tell you what, I won't let that happen again. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, so fast forward to today, we kind of educate in the space similar to what you guys do. We're not, quote unquote teachers or gurus by any means. We just we kind of just share our experiences. So I have a live monthly broadcast that I do on YouTube. Actually, we aired it this past Wednesday, and we do it at 6 p.m. Eastern. And if you look up on our YouTube channel at Bright Path Notes, more than welcome to do it. It's free. It's just informational. We in the future we'll probably have guys like you on as well. We just try to mix it up a little bit with different people in the business to again share their experiences and figure out what's good about the business and what's tough.
I've watched a few of his videos and they're really good. So please check it out and tune into it. Again, I always brag the fact that don't learn from one person. You have to learn from multiple people because everyone's experience is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah. And in doing that, you're going to find out, you know what? I like doing it that way. I like that kind of note. I like this kind of strategy better than the other. And there's no right answer. There's well, there may be a few wrong answers, but really there is such a broad category. When we talk about notes, there are dozens of ways you can do it. So learn from everyone and choose what you like best.
And everyone's strategy is different. Everyone does it a different method, different due diligence method. So, I think for a lot of people, they kind of hone in on one thing and they keep going. And they think no other way is right. Where I can go back and forth, Nathan. We've done it privately. Like, I don't agree with you, Nathan. Nathan's like, well, I don't agree with the way you do it. And that's okay. Yeah. Right. Whatever makes you feel comfortable and what works. Versus, if his way doesn't work, then obviously it's not working. But if his way works for him, it doesn't have to work for me. But taking bits and parts from everybody is key. So let's share a little bit about what your due diligence mistakes have been. What was some of the first deals you ran into, some of the mistakes you had?
So for me, I'll just jump in here and just say, on a non-performing loan, you really have to be extra careful as to what you're buying and make sure your due diligence up front is sound. And it's a good idea to have it double checked with like an accountability partner or someone that's your mentor or a friend or associate like you guys, Nate and Dave. And so what I did was I didn't know that one of the houses that I was buying was getting ready to be demoed. So after I bought it, it was demoed. Okay. So I should have dug deeper into some code violations and some building permits to find out that this thing was slated to be demoed. And so then I had nothing. I had a piece of land that ended up being on there. So there's mistakes that can happen very easily, but if you don't follow your system or your process or your checklist, those things can happen. They don't happen very often, but obviously that stings when it does.
Yeah.
So I learned my lesson real quick with that non-performer. Performing loans is mainly what I do right now, just because I believe the price point for non-performing isn't suited for the capital that I'm using to go after it. I don't want to wait long-term for the big payoff. I just love the cash flow, and I'll make performing loans very profitable for me and with our debt service. So we like doing that. So a performing loan underwriting and due diligence is going to be, I wouldn't say looser, but it's not going to be the same as diving into a non-performer.
Sure.
So then again, like you guys brought up a great point. I guarantee you, Nathan and Dave, you do things way differently than I do, or you go after different types of notes than I do as well.
Absolutely.
And so it's always interesting to learn and hear from each other about what you do. And then I can take a little bit of what you've done and be like, that's really creative. I like that. And add it to how I do my due diligence or how I want to get out of a problem or create a solution for somebody.
And what you said right there is key, because I actually was talking to a newer investor and they said, listen, this asset's been for sale for a while. And why is it not being bought? And I explained to him, it could be the fact it doesn't fit my box.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make it a bad loan, right? In this situation, it was under a $50,000 value. Well, I don't buy anything under $50,000. That's why I completely skipped over it. Doesn't make it a bad loan. It just doesn't fit my box, right? Yeah. I used to go under 50 to about 2015, 2016, and I just stopped doing it. Nathan has no problem going for those lower level things where I just don't feel comfortable as much as I used to. Because of a bad experience.
Now, same thing. I used to go for stuff, between 30 and 50 all the time. And then, it was a few years ago. I just said, you know what? It's for me, with everything that I've got going on and all the systems and everything else and volume and all those kinds of considerations together, it didn't make sense anymore to go after the little stuff. So same thing. My cutoff is 50,000 value for property. And not to say that that's right or wrong. That's just a decision that was reached, looking at multiple factors. So there's certainly a market. And I mean, we talked to Mark Pentak a while back, Ray, and he's all over that stuff, and he's doing great. So it's not junk. And going back to what you said too, I get that from people that I talk to all the time, and they say, "So you mean you're buying the junk?" I'm like, not at all. Not even close. One man's trash is another man's treasure. And that's really the case here. It may be trash to somebody who doesn't want to look at anything valued less than 150,000. That's perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So that, it becomes a win-win situation for both parties in that case.
And the other side of it too, we don't buy anything that's worth over 300 for internal reasons as well. We have a cap. Mm-hmm. And for us, we don't want to deal with the borrowers who have a lot of money or have houses worth a lot, because they can fight foreclosures, they can get BK'd, and those kind of scenarios. And 300,000 seem to be that breaking point. And again, that means based on state too. One of the questions we had was, how do you check to see if it's demolished or going to be demolished? What do you use? What tools do you use to find out if that property is going to be demolished?
Hey, fellow note investor, are you looking to learn the basics of note investing so you can get started? However, you don't want to spend a few hundreds or thousands of dollars and hours online on some training program? Have you thought about attending a notes conference? However, you don't want to spend the money or the time away from your family. Well, We have a tremendous beginners video series of 20 different topics, with each video being less than 15 minutes. This means each video is less fluff and direct to the content. Visit www.jkpholdings.com/beginner-series to learn more. Again, www.jkpholdings.com/beginner-series.
Well, that's when your title search, when you're doing your due diligence, comes into play. You can order a title from a vetted title company, or you can do one of our national companies that we use, that are out there, those vendors that we all use. But then picking up the phone and calling the county and asking the questions like, how do I find out if this notice that's on the door is slated for the demolition? It could be one inspector that controls that area, and you talk directly to the guy that's going to control the bulldozer. Mm-hmm. So that's what I could have done. I could have called the building and dived a little deeper into it to find out, do I have a risk of this thing being demolished? Yeah. And I skipped over it. I saw the violations. I went ahead. I believe what I did was I paid off the delinquent taxes and I paid off the violation amount owed. It was too late, right? Paid off was too late, and I went to actually drive by the property and it wasn't there anymore. So I was looking around going, is this the right house? What? Oh no. And then I talked to a neighbor and they said, yeah, they just demoed it like last week or something. I'm just like,
but one of the things too, and I mentioned this in an earlier video of ours, this is 2014 or so, I'm going to say 2015, probably around. I was on Google doing some Google walk-in, and I'm like, oh, the property looks good. The people are sitting on the stoop. And for whatever reason, I went to check the backyard because I think the roof was slated, and I turned the corner and the whole house was gone. Oh. The pictures in the front were 3 years old, and the pictures on the side were a year old, and the house was gone. So you can use Google Maps and Bing just to kind of check it. But I agree with Justin. Call that county up and say, hey, listen, that's a public record of information. It's not like it's private, right? You can find out that a house is on the list. You not always can tell how long or when, but it's definitely pretty interesting to find out. And you can find the county records by looking online. Sometimes demolish lists are actually published. Yep. But yeah, definitely going through that list. That's a huge thing. Cool. What other areas have you run into in pitfalls that you've had where you've had a loan where things just didn't work out as you thought? Maybe not been a terrible situation where, my FPI, where I was going to place my insurance claim, and then after I bought it, I couldn't because it was the wrong type of forced place insurance with the previous seller. Have you run into a situation where it was just a small mistake that you should have not made?
Yeah, there's definitely annoying mistakes. I can usually get myself out of it now that I've got a lot more experience and I know a lot more people that have way more experience than I do, to lean on them on how to solve the problem, especially with documentation and paperwork and title. It can be pretty easy to solve that. It may take some time, but the physical stuff you can't change. If the house has, complete missing, like you said, the side of the house or the back of the house, like you can't change that. You just have to make sure that you get photographs that make sense when you have somebody drive by and walk the exterior of the property, and just find out, is there a problem with it? Did they notice of the meter running? There's just a lot of little things that we can get into about the physical collateral of it, and then the title work of it. If you notice something looks weird, it's probably weird for a reason. You need to look into it a little bit deeper. So picking up that phone, calling the county officials. You're not going to get the right person the first time, or maybe the third or fourth time. It's a process to it. But if you don't want to make a mistake, that's what you got to do. Now, if you're buying a tape of 100 non-performing loans, you're not going to have time to go through that due diligence. Then again, you're swinging for the fences there. You're hoping to buy 100 of them, and a few of them are going to turn out to be home runs that are going to pay off the bad debt that you have on a tape. So that's a much different strategy than buying a one-off note or a two-off note.
You mentioned BPOs, and I've expressed my not caring for BPOs too much, right? And they have the usefulness, right? But for some investors, what is your strategy when you get a valuable property? Because that's, we can't get inside these properties. We can't look inside unless you're a really, really good agent that does things they shouldn't. But are you using BPOs? Are you using agents? What are you doing to find value? Because that's our key item that we don't know. It's our X variable. What's the inside look like? What's the value of that property? Are you pulling BPOs, or are you doing other strategies?
Yes, that's a great question. And I get a lot of pushback from first-time investors on the reasons why I do stuff. So I'll explain to you guys what I do. So I'm buying I'm buying real estate notes that are more than likely, they have less than a $50,000 unpaid balance. So similar to what Nathan used to do. So the values that a BPO would bring, a broker price opinion, it's not going to have much weight for me because there aren't going to be conventional financing comps in that area or on that street, right? So that value is just going to be probably a cash value of an investor paying cash for a house. That's not going to be the same apples to apples for me. So what I look for is conventional financing data. Well, if I can't find it because the values are too low, then I have to go off of rent data. So I focus on what's the net operating income for this subject property or what's like this, and then kind of work backwards with the capitalization rate to find out what could I sell that property with seller financing. And that is what value I would give that property. So it's totally subject to my opinion and my belief of that area of what I can do as an investor. There's no resource for it. It's just something that you have to learn or lean on someone's expertise on to find out what the value of the property is. So I don't even do BPOs. I won't do BPO unless I think the house is worth 80 to 100,000 in an area where I know conventional financing comps are. So I'm doing just inspections, like what I'll call property inspections, or some sort of property report, or just have somebody take pictures.
We go look.
I have enough experience now to know, like, okay, this is a well-maintained house at this price point. I feel good about it.
Yeah.
Or nope, the roof has a lot of damage. They got a tarp on it. It has a tarp on it for the last 3 years. When I seen the Google pictures, they're lazy. They're not going to be fixing this property. So I don't trust that collateral. So that's how I'm weighing my decision on that.
Nathan, what's your experience with BPOs?
So I do get BPOs, mostly because I'm at a distance and it's a relatively easy thing for me to do. But two things. Number one, whatever the BPO value comes in at, I discount it by 10%. Always, just across the board. The other thing I do is I will actually pick up the phone and I'll call that realtor and I say, hey, so I see you came in with this value. Can you just tell me about the neighborhood? Are things selling? And some of that information is on the report, and then other parts are just not, where it's difficult for a realtor to report that kind of information. And I say, so, were you able to peek into the windows? Because they're not going to typically write that kind of thing in there. Could you tell if it was occupied? And again, sometimes it's on that report, sometimes it's not. But I find a direct conversation is just as valuable, if not more, than that piece of paper that they gave you. And you can find out additional information that maybe wasn't there. And, whether that's good news or bad news. And I say that right to them. And I say, I'm not trying to sway your decision. I'm not questioning anything. I'm just looking for information. So if you tell me it's garbage and the neighborhood is terrible and, it's a war zone kind of a place and nobody's ever going to live there, great. Thank you for that information. Yeah. If you tell me, you know what, it says, I put 75 on the report, but you know what, to tell you the truth, I think things are selling for more than that. And the trend in the neighborhood is this and that. I think by the time you finish your foreclosure, it's probably going to be worth more like 80, 85. Great. Yep. And
that's the information you want. Yeah.
Just information. I'm not trying to sway it either way. I'm not trying to prove my point or prove my position.
For me, we agree with you guys, right? I don't pull BPOs. I don't like pulling BPOs. I've had bad experience with them, and I know BPO agents who just kind of laugh at me when I say, like, people still buy them because they do it and they just laugh at it. Where we have a list on our portal page where you can get up to 9,400 agents, right? REO experienced agents, and we can contact them directly and say, listen, we're looking. And remember, these BPO agents are getting maybe 25, 30 bucks. You may pay $100 for the BPO, but between the company getting the money, the broker getting some money, and then the agent who does the work, they get 25 bucks. If I can ship them over 50 bucks to give me local information, true, and not pull an AVM, get some pictures, get them on the phone, I'd much rather that, right? And I also reach out to other investors. Right? If I have a property in Justin's backyard, who's better to reach out to? Justin or some agent who doesn't know who I am?
Right.
Obviously, Justin says, yeah, Dave, I know that property. Hey, listen, my buddy lives right around the corner. I'll have him drive by way over here and take a couple pictures for you. I know exactly what he's looking for. Mm-hmm. In that 5 minutes, I'm going to send Justin a nice Amazon card and say, thank you, bud. So that connection there is awesome because it works with us, right? And they know what we're looking for. And I agree with you guys. BPOs they have a great place when you're buying bulk, huge bulk, when you don't have the time. That's it.
So here's another maybe pro tip. So a couple other things I do. So I'll call the agent. Here's one thing that I found is if I call the agent and either they don't answer the phone right away, or I leave a message and they don't call me back within a day, then they're probably not worth talking to be honest. So what I'll do then is I'll type in the address in Google Maps and I'll just look at nearby realtors, and it'll pull up somebody that's 5 minutes away.
Yep.
And I'll call that, just cold call, and I'll just say, hey, I'm looking at buying this property over here. And I find it's easier to just say I'm looking at buying this property, to try to explain that I'm buying the note and like, it's just too much information and it's over their heads most of the time. So I'm looking at buying this property with the intent of reselling it. So I'm looking at hiring you potentially here. Would you have just 5 minutes to go by and check it out? Sometimes they'll do it for free. Sometimes they'll charge me $50. Fine. That's totally fine. But I find that the nearby realtor oftentimes will give me better and more accurate information than the guy that was from downtown. And this
depends what part of the country. You get into Missouri, Kansas, they're like more willing to do anything for you.
Oh yeah.
You get into Florida, it's like, nope, they ain't doing it, right?
Or Chicago. They do anything.
And any resource you can think of, especially buying one-off notes, you can call a local fire department. How's this street?
Sure.
Do you run down there often for issues? The police department. Do you patrol this street? We try to buy assets that are near like churches and places and schools where I know patrolling is going to be more often there. So that's how I feel better about, even if the crime looks a little heavy in that area, but maybe it's just theft because there's a commercial, strip mall there that there's going to be a lot of theft there. So you just got to you think about what's legitimate, crime or whatever in that area. So, but those are great tips that you guys did. And then again, we're proving the fact that we all do something just a little bit different, but it works for us. So.
Another avenue real quick, and we'll get to the question that came up, was we did this for a long time. I don't do as much as I used to, but I used to call electric company up and say, hey, listen, what's the average bill for this property? And they say, well, it's, X amount of dollars. Okay, great. And it's still on, right? And I say, no, it's been off. Oh, boy, I'm about to buy this property. I want to know the average thing, and you tell me it's off? All right, thanks. That's kind of, thank you very much. And some electric companies will give you that information, some won't. That tells you if it's occupied. You really don't care what the bill is. You just want to know if it's on. Yeah. And it's, electric's off. Okay, I know to go check it out. So the question we had here is, in your opinion, we'll go with Justin. What is the most important thing in note value that makes you, what's your opinion on the most important thing on a note value when you make a bid, despite the exit strategy?
Well, obviously, depending on performing or non-performing, I'll just go on performing, is the pay history. So me personally, some people look at the collateral first, and then if they don't like the collateral, they move past it. I like to look at the numbers first. That's just my opinion. And I focus on that pay history, because that pay history, and I got a good track record to prove it, it tells me exactly what I need to know about that borrower and what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah. Cool. Nathan, what's your thought about that?
I think that you can't separate just the note versus the exit strategy. You have to be thinking of a potential exit strategy, or in most cases, I'm looking at least 2 or 3 potential exit strategies, and then I'm going off of. I look at I actually look at 5, but I'll most times it'll come down to 1 or 2 that are the most probable, and then I'll look at the lower return based on each exit strategy, and then I'll do my bid based on whatever my lowest return could potentially be.
Yeah,
and a realistic, like if it's, for example, let's say you got a property value of $100,000, unpaid balance is $100,000, and they haven't paid in 3 years. The chances that that's going to pay off are extremely minimal. So if that payoff, and for whatever reason, and this isn't exactly accurate, but just go with it. If the payoff then is your lowest return, it's a very unrealistic potential exit strategy. So I'm not necessarily going to go off of that one, because the chances of that happening are so minuscule that it's, then you get into a situation where if you're trying to explain that to the seller and say, well, this is why I'm going in so low, because if they pay off, then then this is my return. And then the seller's gonna be like, you're an idiot, because the chances of that happening are so small that
we had a conversation with a newer investor. They bought their first loan, and they projected out that they can go get this loan performing again. And it didn't work out. And then they're like, I have to foreclose. And I'm like, okay, what state's it in? Illinois. Okay, and my other one's in Jersey. And I'm like, oh Lord, right?
Boy.
They pointed out the fact that I'm going to bid this on a yield only. There's no plan at all going non-performing. And it's like, so for me, I look at similar, Nathan doesn't, I look at all my strategies. I do go with the minimal, but I have so much buffer in there that I say, listen, if it goes performing, right? If it reinstates, which means I can't modify the loan, what's my scenario? And I bid everything based on my returns. I don't base anything on percentages. It's my return based and backdoors into it. It says, what do I have to, I'm going to get this return. I have to bid this much money to get that return. And I look at every scenario and say, okay, here's my bid for every scenario for my returns and which one's the lowest. And I bid the lowest. Because if you reinstate a loan at a 4% loan and they reinstate it again, if it's like Nathan said, a big number, I'm not worrying about it, I'm going to skip over it. But if it's a small number, you may be in a spot where you reinstate and you're at a 6% return and you're stuck. Or if you're projecting to get a 12% return on a performer and it goes non-performing and you're underwater, what are you going to do? Are you be able to sell at auction? So there's so many little things that, I don't separate those. I don't go into an idea that loan is going to do that extra strategy based on what I want or what it's done before. Yeah. It can perform for 2 years and go not performing, right? You don't ever count on that. I'd say the only thing you can count on is if someone paid during COVID, they're probably going to continue to pay. Just what it is, right? They have a steady job. But yeah, I don't separate the two. Justin, what's your thoughts of that?
Well, you all bring up great points, and I think if you have a good inclination that the note has been performing for a long time and you feel like the pay history looks like it's going to stay performing, then that's how you bid your pricing. The non-performing space is different. It's just we don't do a lot of it right now, but when we did do it, Nathan, you brought up some great points. It's like you have to understand what's the worst case scenario. Going through foreclosure, there's a lot of time. There's some money involved, a lot of patience, and a lot of work in between as far as talking with attorneys, servicers, property preservation people, maybe even utility companies or the county, depending on if you have the land contract or not. So that you have to manage that expectation and build that time cost into your bid. And so you're exactly right. I think it's more challenging to bid a non-performing than it is a performing.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's easy. It's probably why I do it, right?
Yeah. Which is a great strategy.
You're bidding on yield, right? We bid on IRR, a little bit different math formulas. We bid on the fact that we're going to sell in a period of time, but you can bid based on yield. Just understand that if you're going to bid a performing note and you see a 4% interest rate, skip over it because you're not going to get a 4% to an 8 or 10, whatever you need to get to. So we'll narrow down a list if it's performing. If I see a whole tape of assets at a 3%, they're all performing, I'm going to skip over it. Because I'm going to have to discount so much to get it to an 8 or 10, whatever number we have to hit for that state, that it's not worth it for us. So let's turn a little bit here and, talk about your other side of things, partials. It's such me and Nathan did a call a couple weeks ago, and what she said was 8 different ways to do partials, which I don't know if I can name all 8 at all.
Me too.
But partials, for those who don't know what it is, can you explain what that is in the hypos? What's your understanding of when the best time to use them? Why would someone buy them or sell them?
Well, what's great about partials is that there's a lot of reasons why you did a partial, and I'm glad you teed it up that the way you did. So I'll just explain it first to like the first time investor. A partial is a great loan for you to get when you first start out. It gives you a very low entry cost into an asset where the value of that asset might be 3, 4, 5x what you have into it. You're very well protected. You're very well secured right there. You do make a lower return because of it, but you get your foot in the door and you learn about the process of note investing. So a lot of our first time note investors, they like just to inch in slowly like that. They can put a lower amount of money in versus a higher amount of money, like let's say buying $100,000 note, maybe they can get in at $25,000. Maybe that's more palatable to them. And so me as the investor that sold them a partial, well, guess what? I've recouped some of my money. I've recapitalized, which is a popular term right now. Mm-hmm. So I've gotten some of the money out of that note today versus waiting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to recoup that cash flow to come back. So now I can reinvest and redeploy that capital. So it's very valuable to me. And I have the back end of that note that's going to kick in at some point. It could pay off early, or it could just be a free flowing cash flow by the time that note turns back over to me, let's say in 61 months or 121 months down the road. The reverse of that is for me as an investor to go out and buy a partial. Yeah. And you don't hear a lot of people talk about that, but it's a great tool for me. Actually, we have done 3 of them coincidentally this week of people that are looking to redeploy their capital somewhere else. They didn't want to wait 20 years for their return. I said, okay, I'll buy your note. And said, okay, what would you give me for it? I said, well, I won't want to buy the whole thing because the discount would be too big. But what I can do is I can buy part of that note and I give you a chunk of money today and I can give you even more money in the future. And that total sum of money that I give you is going to be more than what you have into it right now. So you'll make a profit. So your profit will be truncated down to 6 to 10 years instead of waiting 20 some years. And they like that. So I can have a lower cost of my money, a lower amount of money going into a deal. I can make a pretty good return. And then I'm in it for a short amount of time as well. So the partial works in both ways, selling a partial and buying a partial. And depending on the level of investor that you are, each strategy works really well. So you mentioned hypothecations. Hypothecations are a great way to pledge your performing note or your asset to get a loan from it. Basically, if you have a rental and you go to a bank and you're like, I have this rental that brings in $1,000 a month's net rent, and I'd like to pledge that to get a loan from you. The bank says, okay, I see that $100,000 valued rental. I'll give you a $60,000 loan against it. The investor says, great. Same thing in the note world. We're just pledging a performing asset or a tape or a larger portfolio of assets to get money in return to go out and buy whatever you want, more inventory, more rentals, more whatever have you.
Yeah, that's great because, another avenue for those who don't know, and I think our traders made a comment on the Facebook Live, is, buying IRAs, right? If you have IRA money, which we do, right? And I just, you can only put $6,000 of Roth in a year. Well, if I take my 6, add to 12, I can go buy a partial for $12,000, right? And get into the game, or maybe I have $1 million into deals, but then I have my Roth money, which can't get a lot into it. I can buy that, right? I can take that money and buy a partial with it. So it's definitely another angle for those who are getting into it, for those who have a little bit of money, or those who have IRA money, self-directed. And I'm going to tell you one little secret. If you go to anyone who's selling a loan, performing loan, like Justin ran into, offer the partial. Because you know what? More likely, you may not want to buy the whole loan anyway. And with a partial, you kind of handcuff yourself with the seller. They're going to walk you through some stuff because if it doesn't perform, they're going to have to buy it back from you. So you're still connected with the seller. We had a question about, do you have to worry about due diligence with buying a partial? What's your experience? What do you do when you're buying a partial for due diligence?
Well, of course. Yeah. Depending on if you know the investor or if you were involved when they bought the asset, you may know a good history about it. I just happen to know a lot of history about a couple of them that I bought this week. And so my due diligence was pretty quick and easy. I just had to catch up from the time that they bought it to the time that I was getting involved with it. And so it just took a short amount of time to do that history. If I wasn't involved with it, I would just be treating this just like a normal loan I would be buying. I'd be looking at it, running all the searches and ordering reports like I do and looking at it that way. So just making sure that it's going to perform the way that I want it to.
Give us an example of what a bid would be for it. Give us a kind of a just rough numbers. I'm going to put X dollars on X loan for X payments.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about, if you drive some of your bids perhaps off of yield or IRR or whatever return or risk that you want. And so with a partial, how I'm positioning it is I want to solve the seller's problem. So my return, it doesn't really matter too much because it's going to be pretty solid. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the amount of money that's left on this loan. Let's just say it's $30,000. And I'm like, okay, it's got 20 years left on it. So that's 240 months. I'll give you whatever, half now of the UPB and then half later when it's my turn is up. I can buy both partials of it, right? I can buy 10 years and I can wait to the 9.5 years and buy another 10 years of it, right? and I can give them that chunk of money, or they can just continue to be on the back end. So on that $30,000 note, I may pay 15 grand for it and just get 10 years of cash flow. Well, that monthly payment coming in, if you add those numbers up, it's usually a pretty good return. But that investor is getting their half of the money up today, which is very valuable to them, because all you guys know about the time value of money, right? Your money today is worth way more than the future, getting the future money, right? And then they can benefit from that interest on the back end. So that's kind of how you want to position it, in my opinion, is like, what do they want out of it? Obviously you and I and Nathan both all buy at a discount. So what if we can give you full value for your note? They're like, absolutely, right? So I'm just trying to solve their problem. That's how I approach it. And then yields just work itself out to be exactly what I want it to be, or they end up being a little bit higher than what I think.
Cool. It's an avenue that I would say is not common. I don't see a lot of partial exchanges, right? But it's happening, right? For those people who are curious about it, there are tons of information out there, YouTube videos and whatnot. I would just reach out to people who've done them and just ask them, what paperwork, Justin, is involved in with the partials? Are you typically doing an assignment of mortgage? Are you doing all that stuff? Are you just kind of just holding off and working with the servicer?
Yeah, it depends on which side of the partial that I'm on. So if I'm buying the partial, there's still an exchange, just like a full loan. You're getting an assignment, you're getting a launch, you're getting a deed transfer if it's, a land contract or contract for deed. And, similar, when I'm selling it, I get those stuff signed and notarized and stuff. And I have my servicing company hold it in escrow. And they know, because they're the ones that are the fiduciary, basically, or the trustee in this transaction, if you will. And they're holding on the documents, so it's fair. So it's like I'm not holding the documents hostage, and I'm not giving them the documents, the partial buyer, and so I just control the deal that way. The purchase and sale agreement is similar to a traditional purchase loan agreement, except there's some different language in that spells out what exactly is going on. If I'm buying it, I'm buying the next 120 payments starting on August 1st, 2021. Make it very clear and simple exactly what you're buying. And then I just want to have the first right of refusal to purchase the next, your entitlement on the back end when the time comes.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, Ray, who I think is everywhere known to man, possibly, jumped in and asked a question on Facebook about, or made the comment that, asking if you want full value for a loan and then working out the details later, which is pretty cool, right? Because you're getting them excited. Hey, listen, what if I could buy I can buy the whole loan for you and then work out the details? So
giving them full value. Yeah.
It's pretty powerful once you understand the financial calculator, and you're not really manipulating it. You're just making it malleable so that it works for both sides. So one of the folks that I bought a partial from, I said, look, you're going to make, let's just throw out a number, like 9% at the end of this loan, right? In 20 years. That sounds great. That's awesome. What if I can get you 11% and I can do it in maybe 5 or 6 years? I'm like, well, yeah, no brainer, right? Okay, cool. Then I'll buy this chunk now and I'll buy this chunk later. And the math works out really well to where I'm making the type of return I want to make in a short amount of time. They're getting some money today, and the money they still have invested in that note is a very minimal.
Yeah.
So they can make a big profit.
And how, like in that kind of a situation, how much education are you doing with them? Are they saying, well, wait a second, so how does that make any sense for you? Like, does that kind of thing come up?
Well, they don't really focus on what I'm getting. They focus on what they're getting, because, the whole point of the conversation is like, how can I solve their problem? Well, they want full value for the note. Who the heck doesn't want full value for their note, right?
Sure.
Of course, I'll take that all day long, and even then some. So the question is, how do you get to that point? Well, you have to be very creative and do this. This is not for the novice person to figure out and go document paperwork. A lot of attorneys don't know how to do this, even real estate note attorneys. Okay, this is something that's an advanced technique that you really want to know what you're doing and lean on, like you guys said, your other partners and mentors in the business that have done this before. And it's not something slick to do. You're just trying to solve their problem. So you get them focused on, what is it that you want? This $30,000 note, what if I give you 40 grand for it? And they're like, okay, they're sticker shock on the opposite side, on the good side, right? Of going, you're going to overpay for it. Okay, that's what I'm going to do, but I'm going to give you money today and the rest of it in the future.
So the next one we had was here is, what is the no-go criteria when you're buying partials? What do you avoid?
The deal
That pay
breaker.
history has to be pretty strong. I really don't want to have to go through foreclosure if I don't have to. Obviously, I can't predict if that's going to go one way or the other. But again, one of the first questions you asked me about what's important a factor to me in performing loans is going to be that pay history. And so I've researched and seen enough of them to know what the outcome is really going to be. Now, it doesn't happen every time, but 19 out of 20 times, let's just say it works out just exactly the way I think it's going to work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
I think, it was a question about partial that I had once. And, for me, partials are a great math game, right? It's like playing a math game, but solving a problem at the same time, which is really cool. Is there a scenario besides the pay history where, so when you're writing up your contract for purchase and sale, how do you typically either sell it or buy it, unless it's the same scenario, for the in case situation if the loan defaults? If you're selling it, are you willing to get back? Or if you're buying it, do you force the seller to put in something in there to make sure that they take it back or pay you? Or explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's tricky to answer that question. So I'll have to preface exactly what's kind of happening in the scenarios that I do. So we'll call me the note pro. Okay, I'm a professional in this business. I've been doing it long enough. I know enough to be dangerous, right? So depending on if I'm selling the partial, the front part of it, or if I'm buying the partial,
Right.
I'm going to be in control of exactly what happens to that loan and in full management of what decisions need to be made on that loan. Because I'm typically probably dealing with somebody that doesn't have enough seasoning as I do.
Sure.
And so I'm going to stay in control, and that's what the documentation is going to say. So I have a buy agreement and I have a sell agreement, right? That documentation is going to dictate exactly what their role is versus my role, and the payouts based on if we go through foreclosure. We're going to make sure that we are, how we do the math here. The servicer is going to control what the payout is, but we're going to try to show what's happening just through traditional, documentation language. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. And then in your experience, has anything gone bad? And when it has, either when you bought or sold, what's happened?
Look, so there's no hard and fast rule inside this document exactly what's going to happen, but what I'm going to do if I'm selling somebody a partial is more than likely I'm going to figure out how to buy them out of the situation so I can just take it over and just deal with it for them. They want cash flow, and that's why they bought the partial. That's why they trusted me to put this deal in front of them. So I'm going to try and purchase them out of the deal to make them happy and make them whole, and I'll deal with the rest of it because obviously I've got more experience and I've got more boots on the ground to handle those adversities. Mm-hmm. And the same thing on the back end. If it goes wrong and I'm buying it and I'm on the front end and the back end investor is like going, okay, what do I do? I'm scared, I'm nervous. Well, if you want to, I'll just figure out a way to buy you out of this situation. And then, you can just move on to something else, or I'll put you in a different asset. So that's kind of what would happen, in my eyes. Now, it hasn't happened to date, but I realize that it can happen, and that's what I would do.
It's a great situation because I think Dave Van Horn did a lot of that when he had the guaranteed seconds when he sold them for years, where you get 11%, I think it was, and if it defaults, they just trade you out for a new one, which is really cool, right? It allowed you to get into a deal with a good return with the safety thing. And I think for a lot of new investors, this is a great strategy if you're new to buying partial, because then you're handcuffed with someone seasoned. So if that loan does default, they can buy it back or work something out with you guys, and they're involved, right? So they're happy if it keeps paying because they made you happy, and they don't have to buy you out of it. But if I'm buying a partial, I want to know the fact that I can finish the foreclosure because I most likely can figure things out better than they can. So I probably will handle this kind of stuff myself.
You just think of it as you're partnering in a new business together, right? You have a 60% stake and I have a 40% stake. And that's, obviously we're both affected monetarily, whatever happens to this. And so it really makes the partnership pretty, like you said, handcuffed, because that's right, you are. Until you divest yourself of that position, whichever you're on the end of the partial or the beginning of the partial.
Yeah.
So then let me ask you this. Have you ever had an investor come in that would like to buy a partial with you or from you, where you look at the situation and you go, I don't think so?
Yeah, not all loans are going to fit for a partial, in my opinion, if I want to sell them or if I want to buy them. It's hard to draw up a hypothetical scenario without, doing a case study and walking through numbers so everyone can see this in real time. But there are situations where it wouldn't work out. So you had mentioned earlier, Dave, about looking at a tape of assets and that they have like a 4 or 5% or 3% coupon rate on them. You'd probably pass them over. I may take a swing at doing a partial on them, because there's a bunch of discount, like you said, built in there. But if I can buy a smaller chunk at a time,
Right.
and then leave them the back end or buy another chunk in the future, it's a way for me to leapfrog through that amortization, give them a better value for what they're selling, and also protect me with a lower entry level versus the value of the property on my cost. And so it can work differently. It's a more challenging and more paperwork, right? And it's a little more creative, but you can make certain situations work for the better when you think about it from a partial standpoint.
Have you ever had to actually refuse a particular investor?
Yeah.
We'll leave it there.
Yeah. Dave, I'm sure you have as well.
Yeah. I have a few investors who I keep an arm's length away and say, it was great. I'll help you get into a loan. I'll be there, but I can't do any more than that.
Yeah, you're talking about a long-term situation, so it's got to be a good fit.
I mean, I'm looking for the long-term business relationship, investor relationship with somebody, and I can tell usually within the first couple of interviews with folks if they're just not going to jive well with me, and I don't want to have maybe somebody over my shoulders the entire time with their. Right. Looking at what I do, which I get it, but it just doesn't work for me. And so I'm looking for a different type of character and an investor. And so that works well with me. And there's other people that work well with those people that are very detailed and want to see everything at a granular level as what's going on. So
is there a time period where you buy loans? You set 5 years, 3 years, 10 years, or is it run by the numbers?
When I buy them and resell them or buy them and hold them, is that what you're asking?
Well, if you're going to buy a partial or sell a partial, do you have a certain number you sit with or do you run numbers and figure out you have a threshold?
No, the beautiful thing about this note business, as you guys both know, is no two deals are the same. Everything is completely unique. And so when you have the tools like Nathan and you, Dave, you just pick and choose which tool that's going to fit that screw or that bolt so you can, assemble that. Like I assembled a swing set a couple weeks ago, assemble that swing set together. So you have to be creative and you have to be a deal architect. This isn't a one trick pony. This isn't a one-stop shop, so to speak, as far as you do this, and that's all I'm going to do. That may work for a small sliver of the real estate note space. And if that's what you want to do, then make a business out of it. Sure. But I love the creativity of it. I love figuring out a new way to work out a deal. And then take a piece of what you did that was creative and work it into another deal or expand upon it and figure out, okay, how can I make this more profitable? How can I make sure the person buying it or selling it benefits even more to make me look like a really good buyer that they would come to next time? So,
right.
There's a question in the chat that I'll let you look at to see if you want to answer it. But, another thing was, some people want to get into this space and they want to get into it really low, right? Maybe they have $500, $1,000. What is the smallest dollar amount you would say typically you can buy or sell a partial at? Is it $1,000? Is it $500?
Yeah.
What can you technically buy that makes sense?
Well, there is I don't know if this rule has changed recently, but there was a hard and fast rule about the amount of money you have to invest with an IRA transaction to be involved in a deal. That was about $100. So theoretically, if I bought a note for X price, if I sold a note for X price and I put $100 on top of it, I could actually be the partial buyer on the back end. I could have $100 into a deal, but may have a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 kicker, at the end of it. So that could be how small of a transaction you can have. Wow. I don't encourage you to do that on every deal because then you might be considered a broker dealer there and you'd get in trouble and a U-bit would hit you, right? Mm-hmm. But I've sold notes for a couple $1,000, whole notes. Excuse me, they're either land or very close to the end of the life of a loan. I would say typically when people ask me how much do I need to invest in a note, I say you need to have at least 30 grand. For performing or not performing, that's just a great starting point. Yes, you can buy things lower than that. Yes, you can spend a lot more than that. But I just say 30 grand is a great starting point. Most people have a couple $100,000 in their retirement account. And it's just, a very low entry cost versus your entire portfolio on retirement to get into. So that would be my answer.
And then when you get a chance to look at that one question in the chat, I would tell people too, if you're going to get into a note and you're going to spend the money, make sure you don't deploy all your money into purchasing a note. You have servicing fees, you have recording fees, and you have everything else that goes involved with it. You may have foreclosure fees of 10 grand. So please be sure that you have some money in reserve. Or if you're doing JVs and you borrow all the money, make sure you have money somewhere you can pull, because you could possibly have an area where you can't foreclose. Now you have to sell the asset. So
yeah, on average, I set aside about $5,000 per note that I purchase. And that varies, of course, because on performing, I don't need even close to that. On one that I do a foreclosure, sometimes it'll be more than that. So, but as a general rule, I set aside about 5,000 per.
That's a good, and that's kind of what I do as well. If I'm buying something that's more risky, I want to make sure I got at least a $5,000 buffer in there just to cover me for something. If it goes beyond that, hey, that's the risk that I'm willing to take. It doesn't mean the risk that somebody else is willing to take. But yeah, Nathan and I were kind of aligned there. I saw the question you were talking about who is or was my mentor, and I have many mentors in the note space. I went through Eddie Speed's note school, and I did that, many years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago. And he's shown me all these different tools and resources that I can apply throughout his 40 some years of investing experience. And it blew my mind every time that I hear him come up with a technique that he does. I know you, Dave, you've been on a panel with him and Bob Repass before. And it's just, that's one of my mentors. And, there's many other people in the note business that I look up to, and, I learned from them. By all means, I don't know everything, right? But I love learning and hearing different stories. And like you guys said at the beginning, just sharing my experience may benefit you too, or sharing your experience on this call today benefits me in some way, because I'm like, I didn't realize that, I never heard of that before. Mm-hmm. You'll be surprised when you get in the note space about how many things you just really don't know. Even being a professional real estate investor, you'll be blown away at the things you never knew the possibility of, especially when it comes to turning on the partial in financial calculator in your mind. And you're just like, oh my goodness, like there's so much money I've left on the table on deals I had no idea.
And I think a lot of people believe that note space, and it does to a point, comes from trees. Like, I think of football where there's trees of head coaches that create other head coaches. And there's trees in note space where people come from different branches, right? Yeah. Where there's Eddie Speeds and there's other people in this space that kind of have that tree formation. Yeah. You sound like you came from the Eddie Speed tree, where you came from that formation, and that you kind of experienced everyone else, but you start out with Eddie being your first kind of person you learn from, experience from. And I've been to his trainings. I'm going to tell you guys, if you haven't been to one of his education courses or even his conferences, they don't do typical note stuff. They actually do on a screen calculator and show you how to break a partial down and how to make money and how you can leverage it to infinity return by just borrowing money here to do this. And it's amazing. I took snapshots, even being in the space when I first saw it. I think it was 5 years ago in Vegas, and or wherever it was. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't realize you could do that. And the numbers are ridiculous, because he came from a seller finance world, not this bank originated stuff that we are all used to now, which blew the industry up. So the trees you're probably talking about, Patrick, is more the fact of, I'm presuming I know you have a mentor, I came from my person, Jack, and Nathan came from his tree. But Justin, you came from, you would say, the Eddie Speed tree, if anything. Would that be accurate?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's the company and organization that was touring around where I live near Indianapolis, Indiana. And that's, like I said, when I first heard the term real estate note investing, I'm like, investing in mortgages. Like, first thing I'm thinking, is that legal? And then second thing is going, I don't understand how you can make money in that. It doesn't make sense to me. And then just sitting back and listening, and obviously folks that are listening to this right now and watching the replay, you get it. Being the bank is totally different than being involved in traditional real estate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's amazing because there are so many nuances, but there are basics, guys. Justin's going to come on a course. We have a beginner's course. Nathan has stuff as well. And there's plenty of YouTube videos out there, right? So this will be on YouTube, Justin on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and do the bell thingy, whatever the reminder thing, to just tune into the things that you get into. And just grasp the information, right? And just take note of what happens. to ask questions in groups. Ask questions that you're not sure about. Because we like to share experiences, but we also like to learn from other people. Justin may give an answer that I know the answer to, but he may have a twist on it that I never thought about. And then I'll write my little notes on that.
Yeah. And that's, going to conferences and stuff. We've all been going to conferences for years, and a huge part of that is the networking. But at the same time, we'll be in a talk, and it's somebody that I know and I've spoken with dozens of times, and they'll say something where I go, well, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. And it changes everything, or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't change everything, but it's just a little bit of a nugget where I go, okay, yeah, I could try that. Or
I would say my biggest time for a conference where I actually got pushed into do webinars, 2015, where I'm like, I can't. And I was people like, just do it. And it was with Kimberly, just do it. And I'm like, wow, and it opened up the whole world to be able to do stuff like this and learn from people on not a 3-4 times a year basis, but on a weekly or monthly basis, connecting with people.
Yeah.
Another question came in is about who are you using for your accountants, CPA, accountants, and attorney for selling and buying partials.
That's a good
Do
question.
you have a list that you work with an accountant, you do your own accounting? Share a little about that.
So as far as like my documentation and stuff, like my mentors are the ones that supplied me or showed me kind of what language you want to build into it. And so you need to have an attorney that understands the space, and maybe even an investor themselves, so that they can, especially in your state that you want, litigation to go through. So CPA and accountants, I use actually a local person here. They have a smaller firm, and they really understand the real estate space in general, and they're excellent with a financial calculator. So they are not a note investor per se, but they understand what I'm doing. So I don't have like a CPA specialist or accountant team that is specialized in partials. I don't know if there is one.
I don't know.
But when I talk with my accountant and my CPA, they understand the language that I'm talking about. So it's not a difficult conversation to be like, I'm buying this much of the note, I have this much invested in it. This is going to be my return at the end of that time period. And in between that, they show me how they want me to do my income and split out my interest and principal and discount based on however they want me to do my chart of accounts. And that's kind of how we work together with it. So I would just encourage you who asked the question to go out and vet your CPA and make sure they really understand what you're doing. Because I'm sure any CPA will be like, oh yeah, I understand notes. Well, you probably don't. If you say that, you probably don't, right? Just like an attorney, that they may say that up front. There's some great attorneys that people have been on your Facebook page, Dave, and that people know in the note business. And so I just want to rewind back to what you and Nathan were talking about listening to people and hearing their stories and stuff, but you also want to vet the person that's giving you the story. There's several people in our community that aren't really that knowledgeable in the note space, and they're giving out free advice.
Good point.
Well said. Well said. And
I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. No, it's totally worth it to sit down with your bookkeeper and accountant and explain it so that they can explain it back to you.
Yes.
Teach
me what I taught you.
I want to be totally sure they know what I'm doing. And we've gotten to that point, so that's very, very valuable. You want to make sure they completely understand it, not just a general understanding. No, like right. a fine.
Yeah, you need a specialist, and you may need to train them and coach them on what you're doing. And it's okay. I've burned through 4 or 5 of them before I found one that I like.
Mm-hmm. Great point, Justin. Many people in the space are like, well, you got one you have forever. I've fired more CPAs than I've hired. I feel we've done a lot of that. And there's going to be times where I may have to fire the one I have now because things change.